how wonderful to be connecting with you again in the new year. And I feel the new year, starting with volume three, is, well, quite auspicious, if I may put it that way,
Yes.
because in volume three, we're going to be looking through the telescope at the universal picture and seeing how man and nature um, connect and interdepend with the wider scheme of cosmos.
No less than that.
No, no less than that. That's our ambition is not the word I want to use because it
Hmm.
sounds very materialistic. I mean, politicians are ambitious.
Aspiration, aspiration.
Aspiration, yes, aspiration. Yeah.
So we'll get into volume three,
Hmm.
into the overview, and
Hmm.
also hopefully onto the first two chapters. But let's just reflect, Eddie, where are
Hmm.
we now? Where are we now after volume one and volume two?
Yes, after volume one, we uh, showed the compound nature of man. And by man, of course, I mean human beings. We agreed on that.
Yes.
And we did it in two different ways by um, genuinely acknowledging the benefits and wonders of science, but also pointing out the deficiencies insofar as science cannot open a window into our inner nature. Science can tell us a tremendous amount to our great benefit about our bodies, and my goodness, we need our bodies. But on the other hand, the spirit, the inhabitant, the soul within that mortal vesture is what science can't really tell us much about. So for that, we revert to the mystery teachings, the esoteric science, the occult science, that has a lot to say about who we are and where we came from. And in volume two, we looked rather more microscopically into our inner nature, into a sort of in-depth examination of our constitution and our nature from the standpoint of occult science, of course, emphasizing the primacy of consciousness and showing how consciousness expresses through all the vestures down to the physical plane.
Can I ask you to zoom out one more level and then we'll go back in, which is
Right?
why are we doing this?
Yes, exactly. Good point. Every human being, whether he likes to admit it or not, seeks to unite with the source of where he came from, as Rumi put it so beautifully. The stone evolves to be the mineral kingdom, let's say, the plant kingdom wants to evolve to be the animal kingdom, wants to evolve to be the human kingdom, and wants to unite with the source in full consciousness of it. So each person, irrespective of his religious affiliation or none, is always aspiring to something greater than his own little self. And he recognizes, whether he admits it or not, that there is something within him which is eternal, limitless, and of that source, of the nature of that source, to which he wants conscious union. So he wants to know himself and he wants to understand himself. That's why we're doing it.
Great. And that fits back onto the little aspiration. Little
Aspiration.
aspiration fits into this wider aspiration, right? When you just
Yes.
mentioned the aspiration of volume two fits within this really cosmic, if you wish, adventure and aspiration.
Universal. Yes, that's right. Sure.
And by the way, the last chapters of volume three are
Mhm.
precisely about this
Mhm.
evolution of consciousness,
Yes.
a topic that, despite consciousness being in its heyday and evolution as well, it's hardly ever found together. Or at least, when I speak to
Yeah.
different people, and I gently pull, not push, pull towards evolution of consciousness, but
Mhm.
it's something that people are reluctant to say. Now, your
Yes.
work culminates in part with taking that very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. And it's the movement of consciousness through increasingly sophisticated and refined vestures as the best and better means of expressing its own innate potential. But in order to express that potentiality, you need the instruments of consciousness, the vehicles of consciousness. So in that sense, it is the evolution of consciousness, though it's not the evolution of the absolute
Yes.
principle.
Yes.
You know.
All right. Now, if you may, an overview of volume 3, and you just mentioned some keywords because in volume 2 we were more microscopic,
Yes.
and here we are macroscopic or telescopic, and you use also the image of a mirror, man as a little mirroring, as a little man as a little cosmos, the mirroring. So walk us through the overview, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. The overview of the whole of volume 3.
If you may.
Well, yes, sure. Most certainly. That's an interesting challenge, which I welcome. Having laid the ground and prepared the territory, which, as I put it a few podcasts earlier, we've covered some rough terrain, but we have springs and shock absorbers to help us on our way. And a lot of that help is provided by the great pointers of the sages and the great philosophers and scientists. So in volume 3, in the preamble, it's important to understand what is blocking us, what's standing in our way. Because if you're embarking on a car journey or whatever, it's important to know where the obstructions are. You know where you want to go, but what's in your way? So that the preamble deals with that, so to speak. And then we launch into, in chapter 1, symbolism, which is one of the keys to understanding the universal wisdom and to understanding us, because a symbol can be taken at many levels. And then having understood or tried to understand symbolism in a general sense, we then see why man is the measure of all things, so to speak, understanding the human being symbolically, and much more than that, understanding the significance of the various occult centers and hidden centers within the human body. Then the next chapter deals with the symbolism of the cosmos. Then one of my favorite chapters deals with how the lotus flower, the cube, the inverted tree, most importantly, the Kabbalah, the Sephirothic tree, are immensely powerful symbolic pointers to our nature, which then I hope you can see a sort of logical progression, because the Kabbalah, all of these, there is always two aspects, the greater and the lesser, meaning the macrocosm and the microcosm, pointing again to the Hermetic wisdom, which is absolutely vital. Symbolism is one of the keys. The Hermetic wisdom is another powerful key. In fact, the first key that unlocks the secret arcana of truth. And understanding the Hermetic wisdom, the next two chapters are just about the most difficult, in a sense, because trying to describe things on paper in a linear fashion, cosmogenesis, the coming into being of cosmos, and then the coming into being of man, and then the divine forces, the truly divine forces in the human being, the forces of preservation, of regeneration, so-called destruction, and the forces of creation or emanation. Then evolution, we touched on that earlier. Evolution being evolvere, to turn outwards. What are we turning outwards? We are turning outwards what is potential and potent into something that is actual. and then a rather large summary and epilogue. And finally, for those who are not faint-hearted, a mathematical codicil, which you don't really have to understand mathematics. It would certainly helps if you do, but trying to get the drift of that chapter, which is why is it that mathematics can model our physical world? It's a question that Einstein asked himself. If our world is just matter and physical this and physical that, how is it that before we make anything nowadays, whether it's an aeroplane or a piece of equipment in a factory or the Channel Tunnel, there is always a mathematical model. How does the mathematics relate to the physical if the physical were not intrinsically of the nature of mind? So it's the mind that has attracted material to correspond to its model. So that's the purpose of the mathematical codicil. And then it also addresses a very fundamental question about how is it that we can see things and physically see things through eyes and ears, but there is an experience. We don't experience billionths of a millimeter of wavelength. We experience color. So how is it that that happens?
Wow. Thank you.
Gosh,
No, especially
memory helped.
No, fantastic. I have notes here, by the way. So yeah, great.
I didn't copy it from someone.
No, there are no preset questions or comments in our conversations at all.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued. We'll get into the cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis, fascinating, and the forces, the divine forces. I also realized as you were talking about it and explicating evolution, also the word information and the word consciousness or conscience has all these meanings hidden in them once you unpack them. We'll go for that. All right.
But now we start with the roadblocks, so to speak. Sorry, I'm not going to.
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead. No, we're going together.
One of the questions is what's holding us back, and of course, the first response would be it's the materialistic attitude. Well, yes, it is. This notion that the fundamental primacy of all life is fundamentally physical matter after the Big Bang and all of that. But I suggest there is a deeper cause, and that is worldly weariness. We are, and I quoted, I think, from Eliot, that knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words, but ignorance of the words. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in data? We are flooded. There's an avalanche of stuff coming at us. And you just look at Christmas time, for example, for worldly weariness. I've not heard one person, Àlex, really, in my office who's not been complaining about the stress around Christmas time. Who's imposing that stress? Oh, yes, you can say my children want this, my family want that, but these are man-made impositions. You do not have to stress yourself Christmas time. Now, I must admit, I said earlier, you asked me how was my Christmas, I said very relaxing. But my stress was self-imposed, working. So I do eat my words to a certain extent, yes. But the external stresses that we artificially impose on ourselves cause this worldly weariness. And that if you're tired within yourself, you can't have the energy and inspiration to explore. So you can think of Nicodemus, the Christ, his advice or his words to Nicodemus, that what a man understands depends on his state of consciousness, his clarity of consciousness. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing or listening, they do not understand. And William Blake, if the doors of perception are cleansed, then we would see things clearly, but we put dust on those mirrors, and therefore we don't see clearly. So there has to be, I'm getting at, a new way of knowing, a new way of looking, which can't be just. And I say just because it's also important. It can't just be in a scientific laboratory or an intellectual concept, but it's really giving time and space for that silent voice within. And now, in defense to myself,
You lay the case and then you.
I just before we meet or met today, I went for a half an hour wonderful walk around my local lake, and it's a beautiful frosty morning. I saw the swans slipping on the ice. Seeing swans so elegant in the water, slipping on the ice, it's quite a new sight to behold.
Mm. A good reminder, because this is again not just about ideas or knowledge. I would even say wisdom isn't possible if the vital aspect, right? Like the vitality, where do we put our energy during the day, our thoughts, and if that's not aligned, then it's really difficult to do this kind of climbing up that we are aspiring here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Let's go into chapter 1 then.
Yeah, symbolism. Yeah.
Yes, whose title is Symbolism, the language of the mystery teachings.
Yes.
And at first, well, start wherever you want, but I have this, and you also do it in the chapter, but what's symbolism as opposed to a symbol versus a sign versus allegory?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Because these words, of course, are used in conversation quite loosely, and that's not surprising. We don't want to be going into technicalities in conversation, but as with so many chapters, I start with clarifying terms and distinguishing between proverbs and parables and allegories and metaphors. An analogy is also another very powerful word, which establishes a correspondence or a partial similarity between two or more things because they're related by a common principle. But a symbol is a pictorial representation of an idea of it or a thought, typically musical notation or the chemical symbols. And the reason they're so powerful is that the meaning attaching to a symbol can be taken at many levels, physical, intellectual, and spiritual. And what is revealed is entirely dependent on the level of consciousness of the inquirer. Two important points to make are that a symbol should not be mistaken for the reality, of course. It's like a dynamic map, and the map's not the territory, but it shows how you negotiate the territory.
Let me share a concern, and in a way you already addressed it in what you just said. So interesting. First, your remark about the symbol as this representation, and I have the concern with the idea of representation, but that in a way will provide to that person receiving it in the measure of the level of consciousness so that's really important and interesting. But my concern is the symbol, the idea of a symbol sounds like exactly that, like it's pointing, it's a bridge, it's a pointer towards something, but you never get to the something, or you're never in direct contact with the something. It's always mediated. So the symbol seems to help because it's a pointer, but at the same time it seems to preclude direct contact with that thing we really want to touch.
That is a very understandable concern, but what is it that can possibly touch the ultimate reality other than your own self-effort at ascending those various ladders of assistance, symbolism being one of them, for you to make that ultimate contact? And I'm glad you mentioned that because it is stressed in the teachings and the occult teachings and esoteric teachings that um, the mind, when it ascends in understanding, there are gleams of thought. There are thoughts and ideas that light up, and new thoughts will replace the older thoughts, and the new thoughts will be of a more refined character. So you're approaching that center you're pointing. But ultimately, you have to enter a world of no form, no picture, no symbol.
Mm-hmm.
So you really kick the ladder away. So you can kick the ladder away when you got on the last rung, but not beforehand. So that's a very valid point. And it is so that you have to part company with pictures and symbols at a certain stage. Yes.
All right. Good. Do you want to discuss some of the major, so to get concrete, maybe to get a little bit concrete?
Yeah, sure. Right. The symbol of the forest is very common, of course. You're lost in there, and who is going to get you out? The symbol of the fish in the pool. There are more sort of esoteric ones, Deucalion and Pyria, but I think it's worth revisiting the well-known symbol of the labyrinth. It is so powerful, and we've all heard of this, but let's just pretend we haven't and revisit it fresh. That Theseus is entering the labyrinth, where he's soon going to get lost because there's no one path, there are multi-paths. And his job is to slay the Minotaur, the horrible monster with the head of a bull and the body of a man, which is completely different from the centaur, which is the head of a man and the body of an animal. But so in order to accomplish that Herculean task, Princess Ariadne, who is the daughter of King Minos, falls in love with the youth Theseus and gives him a ball of string to unroll as he enters the labyrinth, which he does. And after slaying the Minotaur, he follows the string back to get himself out. Now, what's the symbolism there? Well, obviously, the Minotaur represents unregenerate man, crude man, primitive man, hence the head of a bull. He has not learned to tame his passions, his ungoverned sexuality, his cruelty, all of that. And the only way he can tame it is to slay that. And the slaying is done by Theseus, the human soul. So it is the human soul, the higher nature, that can tame the ungoverned lower nature. We need the lower nature to be our servant, not our master. So Theseus is the human soul. Now, the ball of string, and the ancient word for string is clue, spelt C-L-E-W, and it provides a clue. That string is the higher mind. So it is the higher mind. By following that higher mind, one can understand how to accomplish that task of slaying the lower nature by understanding the higher mind. But most significantly, the end of the string has to be held firm. If it isn't, it's just going to get lost. Princess Ariadne, who is she? The spiritual soul. So the spiritual soul falls in love with the youth, the human soul. And that is deeply significant. And in all the literature that I've ever seen, the spiritual soul is always feminine. Ariadne, Beatrice in Dante, Sita in the Ramayana. Now, why is she feminine? And feminine is nothing to do with gender here. The word is Sophia, and the Sophia aspect of wisdom is the wisdom that embraces. Wisdom, by its very nature, embraces and unites. Knowledge, so to speak, cuts up and divides and analyzes. We need knowledge, of course. But Sophia aspect of wisdom is the aspect of wisdom that unites. And like the ideal feminine, she embraces and unites.
As you're describing this, I realized that I think, all heard these stories. More or less everyone has heard about the labyrinth and so on. But how it's not that often that we're told those stories, and not even in the way you just did. And it's indeed very illuminating to just listen to the story and realize how much there is in it. And as you just said a few moments ago, there's as much in it as we can reflect or refract.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure I've missed out the major significance of it, which, if I were a higher person, I would have access to. But remember Einstein advising, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. Stories are so important to read to children. And this is where I have every thanks and gratitude to my parents.
Well, a brief autobiographical note here is that, well, currently, because I have two little daughters, so sometimes they insist on watching one of those, whatever, Pixar or Disney movies. And at first, I'm always kind of, all right. But then I realize when I'm watching it, it's like, well, I'm not sure if it's for them or for me or for everybody, because some of those stories, especially if they're classic stories or, well, even new ones, can be really well crafted. They bear a lot of symbolism, and it's like, well, this cartoon movie, this animation movie, is bringing me more a wider opportunity for wisdom. Let's put it this way, than any other movie thought to be for adults.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. Just one more symbol, if you like.
Yes.
Yeah, the tarot cards are very symbolical, and the Lovers is a very potent one, where a youth, typical adolescent, is flanked on two sides by two maidens, and the point is both maidens love him. They both love him. But the youth has to choose between one of them. And if he chooses the maiden on the right, all is well. And if he chooses the one on the left, he will fall into trouble. That signifies that a person must always be faced with the choice of ascending to his higher nature or being trapped or ensnared by his lower nature. But the point is, both natures love you, but you have to choose. That relates to Plato's teaching that when the soul, psyche in the general sense, rises to nous, the spiritual soul, all is well. But if the soul chooses to descend and attach itself to anoia, the irrational animal soul, then trouble will ensue. So here is a powerful symbolic representation of the choice that we all have to make, not only as adolescents.
How interesting that the previous symbolism, the labyrinth, also contains a very important aspect of choice and decision making, right?
Yes. Yes. And just quickly on the labyrinth, the traditional labyrinth is multicursal. In other words, there are many paths. But the unicursal labyrinth, as in Chartres Cathedral, on the floor of Chartres Cathedral, is unicursal. In other words, however much you meander around, you get to the center. Now, the legend of the Cretan labyrinth is multicursal. You get lost. But apparently on the pottery in Crete, the labyrinth is shown as unicursal, again signifying, and you could say this is imagination or not, but is it, that when we are incarnated, when we are born, I mean, we're faced with many choices. But then through learning, through wisdom, through understanding, through hardship and suffering, we transform the multicursal, many parts confusion. We transform that labyrinth into a unicursal. So however much we meander around, we get to the center. And like the symbolism again of the dog always finds its master.
Now back to tarot again.
Yeah.
The healthy skeptic in me can become a bit silly and say, oh no, are we really talking about tarot cards? Because they are so not misused, but you know what I mean, so worn out. Yes, like yes. So again, you're rehabilitating to a high degree something we've all heard about, or we think whatever, like yeah, tarot card, and then you just make something up. But no, you're saying that's much more profound.
Oh yeah, sure. Very profound. For example, the hermit concealing the light of wisdom. He carries a lamp, but the lamp normally would shine brightly, but it shines very dimly because it's shining through his cape, his coat, signifying that the wisdom, bright in itself, has to shine through our intermediate vestures. And the hermit carries a staff, which is his only support, and the staff is the mind principle that holds them together.
Yes.
And the other point is he's also shielding the flame, because the wisdom is sacred and it can easily be not blown out. You never blow out wisdom, but it can be desecrated by the fury, by what in the Masonic tradition is known as the three murderers. In the Masonic tradition, the three murderers are the bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob.
Wow.
And all of those three things can certainly extinguish the little flame of wisdom in the individual.
Wow. Should we talk about symbolism gone astray? And you write about animal sacrifice, because those things can be used in a really opposite manner.
Way. Yeah. And I think the overriding principle there, Àlex, is that anything, the higher, the purer and the most sacred something is, the more it is prone to abuse, misuse, and desecration. And for example, sacrificing animals, the bull, for example, you don't sacrifice the poor actual bull and torture it in the fire or whatever. What you sacrifice is the bull in you. So you have to sacrifice the tempestuous, obstinate, raging quality in you, symbolized by the bull, not an actual bull. And this is how symbolism got misused and degenerated.
You know, you helped me see here something that I never thought of it in this way. Here we have symbolism. What can you do with it? Well, you can not use it, as I was saying at the beginning. Well, how come aren't we reading those stories and reflecting on these symbols more? The other thing you can do is what well, maybe some scientists are told, which is, well, if it isn't literal, I don't care. So you dismiss it because you say, you see, I couldn't make it literal, so who cares about symbolism? I only care about those things that can be kind of explicit and objectivized and so on. And the other thing that you can do is what you just said. Well, you take symbolism so seriously, literally, then you also betray it.
Yeah, of course. You totally betray it and abuse it. Yes, definitely. So just as I said, the greater the wisdom, the more it is prone to abomination when abused.
Yes, that sounds scary, eh?
But one stands in inverse proportion to the other.
Since the word sacrifice is used in this brief last section of this chapter when you speak about animal sacrifice, but could you say something about sacrifice and maybe the difference between sacrifice and ceremony, and to what extent there are other sacrifices, because we can understand sacrifices, yeah, literally sacrificing an animal, but
Sure.
I suppose sacrifice has a very dignified place in perennial
Yes.
philosophy.
Yeah. The sacrificial fire in that sense is the fire that burns up all the dross. So, to my understanding, of course, and to any mind, the sacrifice in the truest sense is burning up the dross, all the rubbish, the detritus. It is such that the pure gold is preserved. So in order to produce pure gold, you're sacrificing all the crud and all the ore around it, burning it up, so that you retain the pure gold. Ceremony, again, symbols and icons are not the same thing. I mean, an icon is something you take literally, like a traffic light. There's no doubt what
Yeah.
a red traffic light is, what a green traffic light. But an amber traffic light, there's a bit of ambiguity, isn't it? Do you go?
Yes, you brake or you push the pedal to the metal. What do you
Yeah,
do?
but at least you've got a choice of two things. Still, an icon, and I had a conversation with a wonderful lady in the Certain Medical Network, Sue Lewis, actually, who pointed out that even an icon, if to the individual, if it lights up something within, it becomes a symbol. So there's nothing hard and fast about this.
Hmm. Hmm.
But still, an icon, certainly on your computer, an icon has one meaning, let's face it. You know, it's not a choice of meanings. You either save or you delete or whatever.
Yeah, well, that would take us into a rabbit hole that
Yeah.
perhaps you don't want to go, but you made me think of these
But you
views
mentioned
of,
ceremony. Sorry, go on.
yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to mention, because of your distinction now between icon and symbol, that
Hmm.
some current versions of idealism tend
Hmm.
to say that reality is some sort of what we think reality is, some sort of interface, and there are all these icons. And I always felt this metaphor fell a bit short. And
Hmm.
maybe realizing that icons cannot do the job that symbols can is a way forward into upgrading
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah. Unless you make the icon a symbol, um, I mean, you can have for example, the famous one, the symbol of the inverted tree. It can be an icon just to point out that everything has its origin in the higher worlds.
Yeah.
But it can be a powerful symbol of understanding
Yes.
that to understand that not only does it have its origin in the higher worlds, but the whole of manifestation and down to physicality is a process of concretion at increasing levels.
Mm.
So it
Mm.
would provide that extra degree of understanding. But just ceremony, quickly, a ceremony can be completely meaningless, ritual, or it can be very meaningful. For example, in the Parsi, Zoroastrian religion into which I was born, there's a wonderful ceremony of the Navjot, which is sort of the equivalent of the Bar Mitzvah for the young Jewish boy. Now, it can be a mere ritual, but if it provides an experience for you, if that ceremony, if that ritual provided an experience, then it is much more than just a mere ritual.
Yes, these are kind of the reified shells. The
Yeah,
way they become reified shells, they may
good point.
remember, they make us remember there was something alive in it, but it's
Yes,
not there anymore.
well put. Yeah, verified shell. Very well put. Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you, Eddie. All right, should we move to chapter two?
Yeah, sure.
Discuss a bit. So it continues along the lines of chapter one,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more concentrated around the symbolic. Well, that's actually its title, right? The symbolic representation of the unity. And here's the
Right,
key
right,
between
right.
cosmos, nature, and
Mm-hmm.
man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So one of the main chapters in there is the Bebine tablet that was discovered in which is now in the museum in Turin. I suppose if one's talking of the cosmos, um, when scientists so confidently assert that we are the only creatures on Earth, apart from a statistical probability that there might be other life forms, why are they so fascinated with the cosmos? Why are scientists so fascinated with exploring the cosmos, which they so confidently declare to be meaningless and purposeless? So they need to ask themselves that sort of question, I think, first. And why are people, and they always will be, so fascinated with extraterrestrial life, unless there is a sort of inner feeling that we are not alone, that we are not the title of Simon Conway Morris's book, I think, inhabitants in a lonely universe, so to speak. And this question of extraterrestrials, now there is a sort of a disgruntled, perhaps, on the grounds that given the billions and billions of galaxies, there's a statistical probability that there might be some other forms of life, but also recently astrobiology that has discovered primitive microorganisms existing on other planets. But there is far more to that that we'll come on to.
And here I see we start talking about the cosmos, right? Which we haven't so much so far. What difference do you make? And I don't want to be picky about define this and that, but I realize by asking you these questions, things become much clearer to me. And I suppose this can happen to the ones who listen to our conversations. What difference do you make between cosmos and nature? Because you speak in this chapter about the unity of cosmos, nature, and man.
Yes, cosmos, nature, or there are another way of putting it is man, God, nature, deity, cosmos, man. Nature, I'm referring to nature with a small n is the physical life forms. Nature with a capital N, of course, is the expression and the vitality that cosmos expresses as we see it, not only on Earth but elsewhere.
Is cosmos the universe? What physicists say the universe?
Well, yeah. In the next chapter, I've distinguished between cosmos with a small c, capital C, cosmos with a K, which is very important, and universe. These are all fine distinctions. But yes, you can say the universe is now what physicists refer to as the multiverse. Okay, look, cosmos, as used in the occult doctrines, refers to our solar system, essentially. Cosmos with a small c is the objective aspects of our solar system. With a capital C is the objective and subjective aspects. Now, cosmos with a K is not just our solar system, it's all the solar systems in the vast universe. Cosmos with a K. And a cosmos with a K is the closest that modern cosmology has come to an understanding through the idea of the multiverse. And full marks to science for reaching that conclusion just through physical science. And Stephen Hawking's last paper was a mathematical proof almost. I mean, not demonstration of proof. With Stephen Hawking and Hartzog, I forget his first name, they wrote a paper showing a mathematical basis for the multiverse. And there we asked the question, we know the physical constants are so finely tuned in our universe. Are there physical constants in other universes that are finely tuned for those? So those distinctions are pure hair splitting, generally, if we're talking at the bus stop, but they are very significant if we want to understand this thing rather more. Lowercase, the objective, uppercase, the objective and subjective, with a C, our solar system, with a K, the multiverse.
Thank you.
Universe is just one of these generic terms. World
Yeah.
generally refers to our planet.
Yeah.
Again, sorry, the etymology is so important because cosmos comes from cosmein, order. I think it was the word used by Cicero, order. Universe, univertare, to make into whole. So
Yeah.
the etymology is very
Yeah.
significant.
No, totally, totally. And also like this famous example of people in the North Pole who can tell different types of white, like your background and the difference between
Yeah,
the clothes you're
yeah,
wearing and so on.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
if you work out the words, maybe you can amplify your
Yeah,
perceptions, right? So
yeah.
if now we can distinguish between cosmos and world and universe, we can talk about different realities, whereas before it all meant more or less the same. So thank you for
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yeah.
come back to it.
Mhm.
In this chapter, you
Mhm.
speak about another of those that we find in newspapers in its most shallow way.
Oh my gosh, you mean astrology?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, one can say so much. Astrology is one of these subjects so debased. And for my little sins, when I was writing my PhD thesis, I undertook a full course in astrology. I can hardly call myself an astrologer just because I have a paper qualification in it. And if you want to find out about something, you engage with it and you study it, and you study it for
Mm.
many years. And it is a noble and sacred science. So it really is the science. Oh gosh, how can I summarize this? It's a science of the origin and the nature and being and destiny of solar bodies, the planetary bodies and their respective spirits and their indwelling consciousness and how we relate to all of that. Bear in mind that when the great Carl Jung had a difficult case, he would always consult an astrological horoscope. So it is a symbolic pattern of our whole being, our environment, and our relationship and interaction with the environment. So, correctly interpreted, astrology is a cipher which reads the play of both the transcendent and the physical energies within us. And it shows our potential strengths and our weaknesses, most certainly.
What a way to, I've never heard
Yeah.
astrology expressed in this way. Again,
Yeah.
thank you.
But
Mm.
sorry, Alex, just to develop that, as you rightly said, there's no end of charlatanism.
Hmm.
Charlatan doesn't prove the subject is charlatan. It just means you are the charlatan.
Hmm.
And you hear glib statements that
Totally.
Venus caused this and Saturn caused that.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we have a high fever, and all our children sometimes have fevers and our friends, the mercury in the thermometer doesn't cause the fever. It points to the fever. It shows there's a fever. The barometer, the mercury in the barometer doesn't cause the bad weather. It is a pointer. But that said, there are hidden influences in connection with the planets. And it is a subject, astrology, best left alone, if not taken really
Yeah.
seriously and with real reverence.
So how does one, and that's not a flippant question, how
No,
does
no.
one find a good astrologer,
Oh,
right?
I
To have a taste,
yeah.
and I
Right.
suppose it's going to be like symbolism, as we were saying, that
Mm, mm.
depending what you can refract or observe, that's what it will mean, right? But given how much, may I say, bullshit is written and
Yeah.
said
Oh
about
my
that,
gosh,
well,
yes,
if
yes.
we could meet an instance of that done properly, so where to
Mm.
meet those astrologers?
One way is, well, you attract those people who you're looking for in a sense, but the Faculty of Astrological Studies has some certified astrologers. Liz Green, I think she's well known for psychological astrology. There is another area in astrology. concerned with helping people plan their lives post the age of 72. So you certainly meet well-meaning, well-informed, and well-intentioned people. And certainly I've come across them. I wouldn't say I've sort of consulted them now and then, but just one example of the power of astrology. There is the Indian system and the Western system, of course, and the two are not the same. If ever you visit Jaipur, the open air observatory is an absolute classic. It was constructed by Maharaja Jai Singh around the same time that Newton was developing his great ideas. Just look at the morphogenetic field, so to speak, in India and in England. The two were not emailing each other then. So anyway, the Indian system talks about a very important thing known as Sadi Sati. Now, Sadi Sati refers to the transit of Saturn over the 12th house, the first house, and the second house. The first house containing the ascendant. And it is generally known as a time of great stress and hardship. But Saturn, the lord of karma, so what it's doing is this. It's not doing it, so to speak. What it signifies is this, that anything in your life that needs to be thrown away, anything that was meaningful at one time but is no longer meaningful now must be discarded. So during that Sadi Sati time, if you're hanging on to things that are no longer serving you, it'll cause you great stress. So what do we find? Divorces tend to occur around that period. It is not saying that Saturn caused the divorce. It is saying that if the marriage is held together by, because of the children, let's do that, because of the money, and, artificially held together, during that period when it's no longer working, it will fall apart. If the marriage is working, it'll strengthen. So in that sense, it is a karmic indicator pointing out that you will gather the fruits of your strengths and your excellent actions, and you'll also suffer, so to speak, for what went wrong. So if one looks back on one's life without consulting the horoscope first, very importantly, but then sees the patterns in one's life and then consults the horoscope, one can see the periods of stress in one's life and correlate that with the Sadi Sati movement, which is a 7.5-year cycle that Saturn takes to transit over the 12th house, the first house, and the second house. And that's the way one can intelligently use astrology. On the medical front, it has great benefits to offer, showing potential weaknesses. Afflictions to Venus, for example, point to weaknesses to the left eye for very good reasons, because Venus, the left eye, and the intellectual brain are correlated. Now, of course, your skeptical scientist is going to laugh. What has a planet got to do with a human organ, got to do with your mind? Nothing. Esoterically, they are. So there is such tremendous power in this.
Now, you've already said it's not causality if we like to think about it, efficient cause, but certainly, and we can try to intellectualize this to our skeptic friends, if they're still there. Well, I consider myself, you can be a healthy skeptic, I suppose. Sure. They point to correspondences.
Yes.
So, and perhaps that's related to the title of this chapter 2, the unity. Yes. If the universe, the cosmos is one, then
there are correspondences.
There are correspondences that one could read out in the language of symbolism.
Yes. Correspondence is not the same as correlation, of course.
No.
But correspondence and analogy are absolutely vital because correspondence, the two are related by a common principle, but at different levels. So there is a correspondence between the sleeping and waking states, or let's put it the other way around, the waking and sleeping states, and between life and death, between consciousness in life and after death.
So then this proposal of, well, this is not a pseudoscience, this is a royal science,
royal science.
Comes by starting to appreciate the art of correspondences.
Yes,
right?
The art of correspondences, of analogies, of seeing unity, of seeing the whole reflected in the part. And, all attempts to explain astrology in terms of physics is just completely meaningless. I've heard, just as the moon affects the tides.
Yes, I've heard
so
that
the
too.
moon
Yeah.
effect. Come on. And most asylums, or I shouldn't say most, I mean, I know many asylums will corroborate or the fact that the unfortunate inmates are far more difficult to handle during the time of the full moon, even though they haven't looked at the full moon, they're completely enclosed. So one sees these correlations in the widest sense. One sees how they all make sense and come together. Psychological astrology is very helpful, as medical astrology. I would keep away from prediction and prognostication. I would concentrate on the character side of it.
Yeah, I see. I see what you mean. It's like it's kind of a Frankenstein. It's a weird hybrid. If you try to take something that's esoteric and force it to have a shape, a form that's exoteric. So
That's right.
I don't know why to justify it, but then you violate what it is.
That's right. Yeah. Another very quick example is if you see in a horoscope Saturn and Mars together, generally the Martian influence, so to speak, is centrifugal, going outwards, but the Saturnian is confinement, to contain, to provide boundaries. So if you see the two coming together, it's a bit like driving with the accelerator and the brake together. So earlier on in a child, you can see frustration and tremendous temper tantrums and illnesses coming from that frustration. When that child grows up and learns to engage with the mind and control his body and his other faculties, that can be used to great effect.
Something came to mind now. It's like a sense of meaning overdose. What a horrible expression. Meaning, pun not intended, Eddie, that if what you're saying is true, and I must say I know it is, it's just that I don't fully grasp it, then wouldn't it be true as well that if we would be in that state of consciousness, we would come out on the street, look at the sky, see the shape of the clouds, and I'm not flippantly here using, and say, oh, I'm seeing all these correspondences now between like how the wind is blowing at this very moment and the trees and the clouds. That's why I try to describe this state as some sort of meaning overdose where all of those correspondences, they should be everywhere, and that will be unbearable. But is this a fair portrait? It's not just the planets. I mean, in principle, it's everything.
In principle, it's everything, but you pointed out, or you're pointing to as well, Àlex, a constant danger to be aware of. It's the way our mind makes images out of things that are really completely myopic, illusionary. And Manly Hall, for whom I have the greatest respect, in his book on esoteric healing, he gives the example of many people he knows. One example of one lady who was doing all her kundalini and breathing and yoga and absolutely full of all sorts of funny ideas. And she once looked at the church out of a window and saw the weathercock, the arrow pointing at her. And she felt a charge through her body. My God, the devil is now scolding me for my sins. This is completely meaning overload. And Mandy Hall said he could not convince her that it was just the wind turning the weathercock. The arrow pointing at you doesn't mean the devil's doing it. So this is the danger of meaning overload, of taking things completely beyond their natural state and looking at the clouds. Oh, it's raining on me. I'm sinning. Yeah.
I feel we're always transiting. Yeah, we're walking this fine line between saying, well, whatever, means nothing, or well, that's the secret to everything, and now I got it. No.
That's right. And just on that point, Arthur Ellison, who was thrice the president of the Society for Psychical Research, I knew him very well, a wonderful friend and a great professor of electrical and electronic engineering, visiting professor at Massachusetts. He investigated many mediums, and he said the vast majority of mediums are really sincere, but if the medium is not scientifically trained, which very few are, they confuse what they really see with their mental imagery. So the great benefit of science is to peel away exactly the problem you're talking about, to discern from Kriya Shakti, the word is the image-making power of the mind, from what the mind is actually observing.
Yeah. And what a great way to perhaps start wrapping up, because this is another invitation to unite these two worlds, not to say this is the one and the other one is not helpful. We want them together. I mean, I think that's part of the effort we are undertaking.
Yes. That comes back to earlier question, why we're doing it.
Yes.
It's the effort, because we are all striving towards that ever perfectibility. And how boring to be perfect. The mathematical asymptote is such a wonderful, it's come to me, the symbol. The curve approaches the axis, it never touches it. Closer and closer.
Well, there's a great list of really impossible thoughts like that one. Yeah. Ever getting closer, never making it.
So the next chapter, Man, the Measure of All Things, we're talking of really also the occult powers in man and the occult forces that are potential in the organs of each one of us. And the next one talks of the wonderful symbolism of the lotus flower, the cube, the inverted tree.
Fantastic.
On our journey.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful, Àlex.